Hey y'all, I just beat 007 First Light, and here's what I think about it. In this video, I'll be talking about the story, pacing, and the three modes of play. Quick note about spoilers, I will not be sharing any specific story spoilers, however, I will be sharing the game's basic setup and format for the story. Despite this, I'm confident you can watch this video before playing the game. First Light is a completely new experience for me. For starters, I am almost completely unfamiliar with James Bond as a character and IP. I watched Casino Royale about a year ago maybe. It was good, but not great, I'd say. And of course, I know a lot of the basics about Bond, such as his womanizing tendencies, love for classic cars, and shaken not stirred martinis. Beyond that, though, I don't know much about Bond other than he's another character that British people love to go crazy over. This is largely the same experience that I have with the Hitman franchise. I've never played a Hitman game before, but I know of them and the specific design tropes that they follow, but beyond that, I'm really not familiar with it. That's why this game is so unique for me personally, as it takes a brand and style of game that I'm not familiar with and mixes them together, creating something unlike anything I've ever experienced before. My original approach to this review was going to be comparing it to games that I have played before, specifically Uncharted 4, and how this game succeeds and fails at replicating that format over 10 years later. After finally completing First Light, however, it would just be a complete disservice to this game to analyze it in that regard. While I do think comparisons to other games are warranted, like to Uncharted in the story section, it's clear to me that First Light is not trying to replicate Uncharted or any other game like that. First Light is not only trying to be a great jumping on point to the franchise for newcomers, but also to be the most immersive simulation of what it's like to be James Bond to date. While I think its individual pieces may not be the strongest, the sum of First Light's parts successfully come together to create an immersive experience that made me feel like I was in the role of the man himself. Typically, I find story to be a much less important piece of an action movie than the action sequences, for example, and this was certainly my experience when I watched Casino Royale. I don't think the story in that movie is bad by any means, but I felt like it was trying to more so set up a tone rather than anything else. A spy is forced into a high stakes poker game against the guy he's trying to stop. That sounds like a pretty great idea to me, which sets up many great cinematic and action-packed moments, probably the exact reason why people like that film so much. First Light seemingly wants to do the exact same thing, however, because it's unfortunately an over 12-hour game instead of a 2-hour movie, it has to add a little more to it. First Light is much more story-driven than really most action films trying to be the definitive Bond story. I don't think the story in this game is bad by any means either, as it does exactly what it needs to. It gives the game a reason to go from location to location and does a pretty fine job at doing so. Beyond that, however, I found myself having a pretty tough time actually feeling engaged with First Light's story. I think this is for two reasons. The first reason is one that comes to light when you compare it to its peers. At first, it seems like First Light is doing exactly what Uncharted 4 did during its campaign, which is sending its main character to different scenic locations all over the world. I think Uncharted 4 is a great game to look at here because it's exactly what this game should be trying to do. It's an action game that sets up that tone just like a typical action movie would, while also filling in the gaps of the much longer game length with character moments. At a glance, it seems like First Light is going for the exact same thing. I just never really felt interested in where I was going in First Light, however, beyond the obvious things like this place looks pretty. I was left confused as to why the globetrotting approach works so well for me in Uncharted 4, while also leaving me uninterested here in First Light. I think the main reason is because First Light doesn't do a great job at leading the player to the next objective. Throughout this game, the story has an issue with show, don't tell. In Uncharted 4, Nathan Drake will routinely find clues that tell him where to go next, leading the player to feel like they're following along a trail of breadcrumbs in real time. First Light is not really like this at all, where each mission feels very distinct and disconnected because the game doesn't naturally lead you. Sure, the game gives you reasons as to why you're going to each location, but many of them kind of boil down to because this is where someone told you to go next. This approach just took me out of the story rather than pulling me in like Uncharted 4 did. First Light doesn't do a very great job at keeping a central plot thread going, connecting the game's various locations and plot threads together into one seamless idea. This is unfortunately an issue for more than just this game's plot, however. Due to its extended runtime, much like Uncharted 4, First Light tries to add many character elements and side stories to keep the player engaged, but it just doesn't work. But this time, for a different reason. All these character moments are given a reason to exist and feel natural in the world. The main issue is just that there are way too many of them. First Light is filled with plot threads, so many to the point where they aren't all given the proper time they're needed to grow and develop. First Light includes a mysterious female spy love interest, multiple villains, a recruit spy rising the ranks storyline, and even a harsh mentor. All of these things feel natural in the game, yet because there's so many of them, the game cannot possibly balance them all in the way it needs to. A great example of this is the female spy love interest. She shows up for the first time in Chapter 3 with just a brief introduction and then doesn't show up again for multiple more chapters. Instead of being a constant character in this game, she's only in 4 out of the 10 chapters, making her feel kind of like a side element rather than a main character. This is how a lot of the plot threads are. Greenway and Bond's dynamic is a huge part of this game's plot, yet multiple chapters just brush it to the side or don't even mention it at all. Same thing with Bond learning to become a spy. Characters will just enter and exit the story whenever, which feels extremely jarring. Hell, even the final boss of the game doesn't show up until over halfway through, and shows up only 2 to 3 times after that. I just don't think First Light does a great job at balancing all of its plot threads, and mixing that with how disconnected the game's locations and central mystery can feel, I just did not find myself engaged in the story. And yet, despite that, I have a hard time calling this a bad story. While I may not find it particularly engaging, I think it did a great job at what it was trying to do. This game isn't really trying to tell a super narratively driven story with deep characters, but instead trying to use its story and characters to immerse players in the role of James Bond. When looking at the story through this lens, all of my critiques earlier start to make a lot more sense. First Light feels overstuffed with plot threads because it is intentionally so, in an attempt to include as many Bond/spy tropes as possible. Even if the game doesn't do a good job at balancing them all, the game does a great job at making you feel like James Bond rising through the ranks of MI6, dealing with hot spy women and secret evil villains. While it may have helped the plot to only include some of these elements, it would have hurt the immersion, because at the end of the day, what's a Bond/spy story without all of these things? The same thing goes for the disconnected feel of the various chapters and locations. While the plot itself doesn't justify the jumping from location to location, the simple fact that this is a James Bond game does. How could this be a Bond game without it being a global adventure? On top of that, fantastic art direction helps the player accept this fact even more. Beautiful and grand vistas make each and every location feel like somewhere Bond would actually go, adding to the power fantasy even more. I do think there is one misstep here that cannot be explained away by this game's storytelling, which is the pacing. First Light's pacing is overall pretty decent, especially when it comes to gameplay. In the second half of the game especially, the game gets really creative with its combat encounters, and on top of that, the game includes multiple action-packed set-piece moments. These set pieces are never as good as Uncharted and usually just include driving a car, but they do a fine job at making you feel like you're in an action movie. Unfortunately, these things don't do enough to fully save the uneven pacing for the story. The story suffers from two big pacing issues. First, this game starts off extremely slow to the point where it almost drove me away from the game. The first chapter and gameplay encounter are fantastic as it feels exactly like something that would get Bond noticed by MI6, while also setting up the central theme of the narrative. Unfortunately, after that, it falls flat. A goal IO Interactive had with this game was to have an invisible tutorial, similar to Uncharted 4. The way they decided to go about that was to show Bond going through his MI6 training. Narratively, this makes perfect sense and does align with the game's goals of immersing the player within the role of Bond. I just think First Light makes this portion of the game way too long. I personally felt like the tutorial didn't end until Chapter 3. The nightclub mission was too linear and on rails for me. And so that means there's like a 2-hour section of this 12-hour game that's just a completely on rails tutorial. It's just not a great opening and makes me think the devs missed their mark when it comes to crafting an invisible tutorial. I think the bigger issue with this story's pacing is how much it forces you to slow down and talk to characters. One example that sticks out in my mind is the start of Chapter 7, where you spend literally like 20 minutes just walking around talking to Greenway. I just flat out do not understand why this choice was made, and it just plainly goes against this game's entire approach to storytelling. Not only do characters just come and go from the story, but they're also just basic and cliche, being little more than just ideas for the player to latch onto. I think Greenway is actually a really great example of this. His role in the story is essentially just the mean mentor figure who teaches Bond everything he needs to know, but is constantly criticizing him for rule breaking. Of course, over the course of the game, both characters start to grow a bond and see each other's side a little more, being able to move past their differences and work as a team. I like Greenway. I don't think he's poorly written or acted, and he does certainly have a character arc. Yet, is this not a generic characterization? This doesn't just go for Greenway, as really all characters in this game, including Bond himself, fall into this trap. If the goal of this game is to immerse you into the role of Bond, then one of the ways it does that is through its characters. The characters in this game don't need to be anything more than just generic character archetypes, because all they need to do is make the player feel a certain way. Any more characterization, in fact, would maybe even risk hurting the immersion of being Bond. So then why does the game feel the need to constantly have you walk and talk with these boring and generic characters? I already understand that Greenway doesn't like me. I don't need to talk with him over and over for 20 minutes to figure that out. First Light's story could be seen as a mixed bag. On one hand, it's got some pacing issues and makes it hard for the player to engage with its plot and characters. On the other hand, it's purposely told in a way that lets the player step directly into the shoes of Bond and live out the power fantasy of being a spy and action hero. While I personally wish the story was a bit more engaging, I think it ultimately succeeds in its goal of making the player feel like they're playing a spy movie. The same thing could be said about First Light's gameplay, as it too is entirely designed around being as close to an immersive Bond/spy experience as possible. The difference is that the gameplay takes it even further with 3 different modes of play, each taking inspiration from different games that all come together to create an authentic and immersive James Bond experience. First up is stealth. IO Interactive has a lot of experience with the stealth genre due to their Hitman series. However, I unfortunately haven't played a single Hitman game. Because of this, another game First Light took inspiration from really jumped out at me: Watch Dogs. The basic elements of stealth in Watch Dogs can all be found here in First Light, just heavily expanded upon. Fortunately for First Light, not only do I love stealth, but I also love Watch Dogs. The entire stealth system is built around the Q Watch, which is essentially just your cell phone from Watch Dogs. The Q Watch can also do essentially everything the cell phone can do and more due to the loadout system. By the end of the game, you get to pick 3 different gadgets in your loadout, along with the ever-present generic hacking option. Unlike Watch Dogs, however, you can run out of battery and/or chemicals, which are both needed for certain gadgets in your loadout. Battery and chemicals can be found in the environment and on dead enemies, which push you to not only explore the environment, but take out enemies instead of avoiding them. Despite taking measures to be more interesting, I still think that this feels like a stealth game from 2014. I'm doing quite literally all the same things I did in Watch Dogs. Hacking some nearby object, or in this game's case, shooting a laser in their eye, going up behind them and then taking them out. Stealth areas do indeed get more complex as the game goes on, but once you really get the hang of this game's few differences from the traditional Watch Dogs style of stealth, it's really not that much of a challenge. I think some people may find the stealth in this game just a little underwhelming, but for me personally, it's all it has to be. I like sneaking up behind enemies after distracting them, and while it may not hold up the best upon many replays, for a first playthrough, it's almost exactly what I wanted. This game's combat can also be compared to Watch Dogs, but in a much more general way, I'd say. Much like Watch Dogs, First Light has pretty generic third-person shooting, along with a focus meter that has to be charged up via killing enemies. The focus meter can be heavily abused in both games to get easy one-kill headshots. Both games also deal with this issue in similar ways, adding enemies with various levels of armor, including an enemy type near the end of the game, which is fully covered in armor and will take many bullets from even the strongest guns to kill. Unlike Watch Dogs, however, First Light has one big mechanic that completely changes how not only the focus is used, but the entire gun combat, being the License to Kill mechanic. License to Kill is a fantastic idea for a mechanic, because not only does it help immerse the player into the character of Bond, but it also incentivizes the player to actually use stealth instead of avoiding it entirely. My main issue with that is while License to Kill does do both of these things, it also harms many other parts of the combat, to the point where I think it needs some adjustments in a future sequel. It's definitely something that I think should stick around, but not in this exact format. Going back to the focus mechanic and the Watch Dogs comparison, the License to Kill mechanic completely changes the dynamic of the use of focus in combat. Watch Dogs is arguably just as stealth-heavy as First Light, with the difference being that you can use silenced weapons in combat. Because of this, I personally like to use the focus mechanic to more easily one-hit headshot enemies from long distances, rather than using it in combat. This works well with the differences in pacing with the 2 modes of play. Focused is used more often in the slower stealth sections and less in the faster-paced combat sections. First Light is the complete opposite of this. Because you cannot use weapons besides in the cases when the game tells you to, which besides once is never in stealth, the focus mechanic here is instead used entirely in the fast-paced combat sections, which just does not mix well. Constantly slowing down time really slows down the pacing of combat when it should feel fast and fluid. Yes, this problem does get better as the game introduces armored enemies that cannot be one-shot headshotted, but the focus meter is still less of a tool to be used in combat rather than just the intended solution. So why do I say all this? If I don't like constantly slowing down time in combat, then why don't I just not do it? Well, that's because the game actively incentivizes you to do so. See, not only can you not use your weapons if you don't have a license to kill, but you also can't even pick them up. When you are finally given a license to kill, the game will either provide you with a weapon, or you have to go out and get one. The issue with this is usually, at best, you're given one clip of ammo and thus every single bullet counts. You need to use the focus mechanic because if you don't, you're going to run out of bullets and be screwed. First Light just does not like to give you ammo for your guns regardless. Yes, you can pick up ammo from fallen enemies, but usually it's not much. Another issue is that the weapon pool is incredibly large in this game with around 20 weapons that you can pick up and use. It's very common that an enemy will have a gun that you don't, and since you can only have a pistol and one other gun at a time, you're very frequently going to have to swap weapons. I just don't think this approach works as well as it does in, say, Halo or COD, for example, because this is meant to be a much slower paced cover shooter. You can't as easily just run out of cover as you can in an FPS, so that just makes conserving ammo just all that more important. The final issue with License to Kill, and the one that I think will be the easiest fix, is just that it lowers the amount of gunfights. There's probably about 10 gunfights in this whole 12-hour game, and I just would have liked to see a little more for an action game. The next game could easily just double that amount and create more action scenes, but I do think the game intentionally had a higher emphasis on stealth than it did on action combat. I do think it would be nice to trigger dynamic combat sequences where you could stealth a room of enemies or go in guns blazing more often as well. It is here, but just not as much as I'd like. Not a big issue for me personally, however, as I think the balance is close enough to being good. A side effect of the License to Kill mechanic is that you don't get to use silenced weapons very often. The game does have them and you are able to use them in stealth, but it's maybe 1 to 2 times throughout the game. I personally love to use silenced weapons in stealth games, and so I do feel that loss here. That being said, it's not like you can never enter combat during the stealth sections, because you actually can. First Light actually has a really decent melee combat system which can not only be used during stealth sections, but also during combat sections as a crutch if you run out of ammo. I actually really like this mechanic and see it as a really great solution to some of the problems that the License to Kill causes. A big reason behind License to Kill is to essentially force the player into engaging with the stealth system rather than just shooting everything. That does raise the question though, what happens when you get caught? If you get caught in First Light, the enemy that caught you and all surrounding enemies will essentially enter into a fist fight with you. This means that there's a consequence for getting caught, but also allows you to re-enter stealth once you beat everyone up, as the melee combat is silent. First Light's melee combat can be compared to The Last of Us. It does kind of feel much more free flow than that game though, but not to the level as something like the Arkham series. What really makes it feel like The Last of Us is the sound design. Each punch feels like it has weight to it, and a grapple mechanic and the ability to throw small items at people makes the combat feel much more visceral. Melee combat isn't exactly easier either, as you do have to put in some effort, especially when fighting larger groups of enemies, to not die. I think it's a great way to punish the player for failing stealth while also keeping it from being too punishing. You get to continue stealth after, but you have to survive a fistfight. I do think the melee combat can become a bit of a crutch at times though. Like, at worst, you're going to be fighting 5 or 6 enemies at a time, and once you're done, you can re-enter stealth like nothing happened. I think there should just be a little more punishment for entering the melee combat, like maybe increased enemy alert status or something. Overall, though, the melee combat is great, and while it may not feel or look as good as Arkham, in the overall gameplay sandbox of this game, it's a middle ground between stealth and combat, and does a great job at it in my opinion. Exploration is this game's third mode of play, and another staple for IO Interactive. The Hitman World of Assassination trilogy especially creates large sandboxes for players to explore with the ultimate goal of killing a target. Once again, however, I haven't played Hitman and instead found myself comparing First Light to another game, that being Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity introduced Black Box missions to this series, which were essentially just those Hitman-style sandbox levels, if not a little less complex than I'd imagine Hitman to be. When comparing First Light's approach to exploration to something like Hitman or Unity, however, some problems start to arise. Unity's black box missions are open-ended, where the player has multiple different ways to kill their target. So, for example, you could poison someone's drink, pretend to be a dead body to get near someone, or just simply kill them the standard Assassin's Creed way. There's the more unique and cinematic approaches that take more effort, and then there's the maybe slightly easier but also less fun ways of doing it. These missions reward the player for putting in more work with cool kill animations. In a stealth game like Assassin's Creed, this is a valuable reward and one that gives these missions high replayability. Bond isn't an assassin, however, he's a spy, so naturally he doesn't really have targets to kill. This means that First Light can't really reward you with cool kill animations. Instead, the different branching paths themselves are the reward, and I think in concept that's a really great idea. In practice, however, this falls flat on its face for one simple reason. The branching paths just really aren't that interesting. The first open area in the nightclub is a really great example of this. Your goal is to get upstairs, and you have at least 2 options to do so. You can go behind a secret set of stairs behind the bar, or you can climb up behind the stage and walk over the nightclub floor. I chose the second option, and it was admittedly cool to walk above the crowded dance floor and jump onto the second floor, but it just wasn't enough for me. The way I got there was different, but in the end, I just simply made my way upstairs, and the end result was the exact same for both paths. This is how literally every single open area is in the game. You have a central objective, which is almost always to just get somewhere, and then you have a few ways to do so. I just didn't find myself very engaged with the exploration in this game because I didn't really care how I achieved something if the outcome was the same every time. What's the fun in choosing if I want to steal a press pass or dress up in a disguise or something if the same thing is going to happen anyway? Without the visible reward, these branching paths just feel like they're there because they're in Hitman rather than actually being interesting. That's another issue I have with the exploration too, is that these different paths you can take are just usually not very interesting. Very rarely will they actually put you into unique stealth or gameplay encounters. There are certainly situations where they do so for sure, like one where you have to fight in an underground boxing ring, but that's seemingly the exception instead of the rule. I wish First Light could have less branching paths so the ones they do have can be just as interesting as the linear gameplay encounters. Now, there are some big benefits to the exploration being here. The first one is that it heavily incentivizes replays and encourages players to explore levels as much as they can. The hotel level in Chapter 3 is a great example of this, with just tons of different paths, little secrets, and rooms to explore. While each path may not be interesting on a first playthrough, on replays it can be interesting to see how much each differs from each other, along with the depth of each level and the sheer numbers of ways to get an objective done. The second way is a little less obvious while being much more important. The exploration in this game is one of the biggest elements of the game that immerses the player into the role of Bond. By giving the player the option on how they want to complete an objective, it directly puts them into the character of James Bond and the spy persona much more than any linear series of objectives ever could. This can literally only be achieved in the medium of video games, and First Light is taking advantage of that directly. While I do wish the exploration mechanic would have given me more rewarding and exciting paths to take, the game's main goal isn't really going for that. It's trying to put you in the shoes of Bond, and that's exactly what the exploration does. The stealth and combat do the same thing as well. The Q-Watch loadout system lets the player choose exactly what tools they think would be best, which allows for players to immerse themselves in the stealth. Giving players a set loadout or linear path would take players out of the immersion. Same thing goes for the combat. The melee combat gives a crutch for players who want to play a more fast-paced and riskier Bond, while the License to Kill mechanic puts the players under the very same rules Bond himself follows, directly putting them in his role. While I may not love everything about them, the stealth, combat, and exploration all come together to create the most immersive simulation possible of what it would be like to be James Bond. 007 First Light is an interesting game for me personally. It's unlike anything I've ever played before, while also taking inspiration from so many games that I have played. Many of its core components, such as the story and gameplay, all have many issues in my opinion. The story is biting off more than it can chew, with uneven pacing, way too many plot threads and characters, and a feeling of disconnection between chapters and locations. The stealth is a bit basic, the combat suffers from the License to Kill mechanic, even the exploration feels a bit one-note and unrewarding. Yet, it's the way that they all come together that makes all the difference. First Light's story is built in a way where the player can place themselves directly in the place of James Bond, with all of these issues, except maybe the pacing, actually being intentional design choices in order to achieve that goal. The same can be said for the gameplay, where all three modes of gameplay come together to do the same thing in a way that can only be done in the gaming medium. That's why I say First Light is unlike anything I've ever played before, because so many of its issues are intentional. Its one main goal is to make the player embody the role of James Bond, and I think it succeeds at that. I do wish the story was a bit more engaging, and I wish it was more fun to explore the open levels, but for what this game is, it works for me, even not being a fan of the character. If you are a Bond fan, however, then I'd imagine this game would be top tier for you. I cannot wait for a sequel to see how IO Interactive refines the formula it set up with this game while staying true to its goal of immersion. I recommend 007 First Light. 7 out of 10. Well, y'all, that's my review of 007 First Light. If you like this video, please make sure to like, comment, or even subscribe. Please make sure to also check out my TikTok at goodusername011. That's all I got for today, but I do want to take the last few moments to talk about me and my channel. Alright y'all, so this is going to be a long one today, so feel free to skip ahead if you want to hear what's next for the channel, or just stop watching here, to be honest. Okay. So at the end of all my previous videos, I've been like, I'm probably going to take like a break, in the sense of like, I'm not going to have time to work on videos. And obviously that was true, but not for the reason why I thought it would be. So I thought my internship would like drain me of all my energy and take up all my time and all that. And I guess that's kind of true, but that's not why. So believe it or not, I'm actually loving my internship. People really like to hate on corporate, but I don't mind it at all. Like, yes, there are some stupid things about corporate life, but like, I'm actually really loving it. I feel like I have a lot of freedom. Everyone is so nice and helpful to me. I don't have anyone breathing down my neck. The work is easy, obviously, right? But yeah, it's not that bad at all. I'm loving my internship, even if it's 40 hours a week, even if I have to wake up at 7 a.m., all that, right? So what is taking up all my time then? Well, let me tell you a typical day, what a typical weekday looks like for me. I wake up at 7:30 a.m. And then I get out of bed 7:45, get dressed, go to work, arrive by like 8:05. That's another thing I like. They don't care if I'm a little late. What? Yeah, so I work until 5. I get off at 5, get home. When I get home, I might hang out with my mom a bit, or my sister or something, but usually I'll go to sleep. I usually sleep for 2 to 3 hours, so I'll get up around like 8:30, right? Then I'll either go get dinner or make dinner, and then I'll eat it while watching Love Island. Yeah. And then after Love Island, my boyfriend will be back from work, and then I'll hang out with him until I go to sleep. That's what every day has looked like for me. Yeah, Love Island is really taking up an hour of my day, every day. I love Love Island, by the way. This is my second season I've watched, and my first one I've seen kind of live. I saw season 7, like, I started watching the week before it ended or something, so yeah. But yeah, like, that's taking up a lot of my time. Probably not a coincidence that I'm filming this the day the finale came out. Trinity and Bryce won. Yay! That's who I wanted to win. Kenzie got eliminated though. Ugh, right? Yeah, but, so I know what you're thinking. What about weekends? Well, as you can tell, I've moved to a new house. That is taking up a lot more of my time than I thought it would, because literally every single second of my weekends is either moving or hanging out with my partner or my friends, right? So yeah, that sucks. And also it's like, I want to hang out with my boyfriend, like, I'm sorry, or like my friends, like, I want to hang out with them, so I'm gonna put them over making content. So I finished this game on the 19th, which is already like way after it came out, like 2 weeks after it came out or something, right? So like, I didn't even finish this game until almost 3 weeks into my internship, right? I didn't finish the script until the 11th of July. So yeah, I think it was a great script though. I'm really happy with this script, like, even though it took me so long to write. But yeah, like, yeah. So finally, July 4th weekend came around and we were done moving. We had everything moved into our house. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to film. And then we had our power go out. So I couldn't film that weekend because it was so hot in here. It's been like a heat wave. So not only would I not have lighting, which, by the way, I know the lighting in this video may not be the best. Working on that. But like, it's so hot. Like, I'm in this currently like room which is uninsulated, so it's extremely hot in here. I got this though. Let's see if I can grab it. This fan. Oh my god, lifesaver. Borrowed it from my sister. Literally lifesaver. Yeah, so it's hot in here. So I couldn't have recorded anyway, like, so my power went out, all that stuff. So I was gonna work on my script, ugh. So yeah, that's why it took me so long to make this video. I wanted to, and like, to be honest, did I have some chances where I could have written, like, made some progress on this, but I didn't? Yes. Okay, but, you know, there's a lot going on, and there's going to be more going on. Like, I have to move out of my apartment. I have to drive back to Columbus and move out of there. Oh, got a hair in my mouth. But yeah, like, there's a lot. So, yeah. But that doesn't mean I want to, like, stop. Like, I'm gonna put an effort into the next thing. So, what's coming next? Well, next will be Deltarune Chapter 5. I still haven't even started playing it. Can you believe that? It's been out for like 2 or 3 weeks. Ugh. Probably won't play that till this weekend now. Well, Love Island's over, so maybe. But, yeah. I don't know. Deltarune Chapter 5 will be next. Then Doom the Dark Ages DLC. Then the AC4 remake. And then Halo CE remake. I would like to get Deltarune out, just at least the script done next weekend, but no promises. Here's the good thing. My internship ends August 7th, and then I don't go back to school until August 20th. So I'll have, like, what, 2 weeks or something there to just work on videos and do nothing else. So hopefully I'll catch up by then. But my goal is to at least get the Deltarune video done before then. Will I do that? Probably not. But yeah, that's really it. I don't know. I'll keep going. Like, all those videos I said at the end of my last video, I was like, I'm just gonna make 6 videos in June. I knew that wasn't gonna happen. Said it anyway. Those videos are not canceled, just pushed back 100%. I'll make them eventually, probably not for a long time though. This is a busy year. But yeah, like, I'm so sorry it's been so long, you guys. Literally every single day I've been like, I need to make progress today. I need to make progress. And then I just ran out of time. Like, literally today, that almost happened again. I was like gonna record all day. I was like, after Love Island, I'm gonna record. And then my boyfriend, like just wanted to hang out. And it's like, then I couldn't be able to record. And then it's like, then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I have to do it. Today's a good day. It's not too hot out. So that means this room won't be too hot. Just have to do it. And yeah. But yeah. Deltarune. Gonna try my best to do that. Once again, so sorry you guys that this happened. But you know what? That's okay. And I had fun making this video. So yeah. Hopefully I'll see you guys in less than a month. Like it took this one. Or a month and a half or whatever. But yeah. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Thanks for watching this video so far, if you did. And, thanks for everything. I just really appreciate it. I love doing YouTube. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, y'all. Bye!